All right, so when we find the range, we are looking at the y values. And if you guys look at this one, do you guys see how there's a little gap right in here?
Yep.
We got some missing y values right there. When we do the range, there is no shortcut like domain. You have to look at the picture to do the range. And the purpose of us looking at the range this year in Math 3 is not because I expect you to be perfect at it. It's because these types of graphs are really important in pre-calculus and calculus. So I'm going to introduce you to the idea of range this year. I probably will not have it as a real test question. It would probably be a bonus question, to be honest. Okay, so I'm not going to expect that we're all going to be perfect at it right now. I just want you guys to start understanding how it works and maybe be able to get it right sometimes. Not necessarily every time, because these are kind of difficult. All right, so for the range, it is going to be helpful when we look for the range for us to write down what our maximums and minimums were. So our maximum was at this point right here, and I should see you labeling it on your warm-up. And then the minimum was over here. So when we do the range, we go from down to up. Let me zoom in. So if I look at the down part of the graph, what do you guys see at the bottom? Yeah, we got an arrow down here, so that is negative infinity, and that's where we're going to start the range. And all these negative values are good. So I can see negative 8 on the graph. I can see negative 7, negative 6, negative 5, negative 4, negative 3. And negative 3 you can actually see in 2 spots. It's here and here. And then negative 2 is in 2 spots on the graph. Negative 1 I can see in 2 spots on the graph. And all these y values are good until, which y value do I get to where the graph stops right there? Yeah, it's not 0 quite. What is it at? 0.06. That's where the graph stops. So I'm going to say 0.06. Now, that is a number where if you were to ask me where 0.06 is, I could put my finger on it and say it's right there. So does it get a parenthesis or a bracket? Gets a bracket. And then, one second. And then if we look, we got missing y values in here. So we have to skip the y values in between, and the next y value that we can see is 1.94. Did that answer your question? Yep. No? What was your question?
Why are we doing brackets for range and not domain?
So domain, those were excluded values. Those were values we really truly could not have.
Okay.
This value is a maximum. It's a point on the graph, which is why it's a bracket. Okay. So we have this gap of missing y values, and the next y value that we can see is the 1.94. So I'm going to put the u here, and then I've got 1.94, and that's a real point, so that gets a bracket. That's actually on the graph. Okay? And then after the 1.94, I can see y values of 2 are happening, y values of 3, y values of 4, y values of 5, 6, 7, 8. So what should I put? I should put infinity, because after that it just grows forever. So that is the range for number 1. Yes, ma'am. So why did I not put anything in between here? Can somebody tell me why I skipped those numbers? Yeah, if you look at the graph, there is no y values at those numbers because there's an actual gap in the graph. So we had some free space right in here, right in the middle. And the free space in the middle was from these y values of 0.06 to 1.94. There's just nothing happening there. Yeah, that's why we skip it. Okay, number 2. We're going to have a completely different answer for number 2 because there are no, you're not going to notice necessarily patterns in the range quite like you did in domain. I think domain was pretty easy to find. Range is a lot more difficult. So we're not going to see those same patterns. So if we look here, I do have a maximum and a minimum that I can label. So I got my maximum right there, and that is at 0.58, 0.07. My minimum is at 3.51. 2.24. So I'll go ahead and get my range started. So for range, we always go from down to up. So what is the down part of the graph? Negative infinity. We got negative infinity down here. And if you think about how this graph is working, we have this slant asymptote. You guys see that right there? We got that slant asymptote. So this part of the graph actually keeps going down and going down and going down and going down. Do you guys see that? This part of the graph goes down forever. Yeah, so Katie just said, would this graph just be negative infinity to infinity? And how could she say that? Any ideas? What if you cover, let's cover it, so I see a gap right here, but what if I don't even look at those two curves? What if I just look at this one over here?
There's no horizontal asymptote.
There's not a horizontal asymptote here, and even if there was, it wouldn't really matter because we have this graph is going down forever, and this graph is going up forever. So because of that curve right there, we're going to say negative infinity to positive infinity, even though we have some gaps over here.
Oh my God.
So we're just looking to see what y values we can see on the graph, and because of that curve on the left, I can see all the y values are there. All the negative y values are down here. I got a y value of 0 in the middle. I got all the positive y values up there. I don't even have to look at the rest of it because I already know all my y values are covered. Okay. So negative infinity to positive infinity for that one. All my y values are there.
And that's it?
And that's it. Okay? Do you guys see how these can be kind of tricky?
Yeah.
They're a little different.
Don't ask no questions.
The reason I only looked at the left one is because the left one gave me all the numbers. And if I don't have to skip any numbers for this one, then I don't need to skip any numbers over here because I already know those y values are being used. So up here in this graph, we truly had a piece of the graph that was like where no y values were actually found there. And here, it looks like I might be skipping a y value of 1, because if I look at these two, I can see there's a gap there, and I'm like, oh, a y value of 1, that might not be happening. But then when I look over at this graph, I can see a y value of 1 is happening right here.
So it's the same thing with number 3, right?
Well, let's flip to number 3 and look. All right, number 3. So this one, we're back to kind of the graphs that are a little bit tricky. So we got to be careful on this one. We do have a hole in the graph, and that might affect our range because the hole tells us a y coordinate that we're not going to have. That's actually missing from the graph. So we have an x coordinate of 2 and a y coordinate of -0.5. So got that filled in. Okay, so if we look at our range, what do I start with? Negative infinity. And then we have -8, -7, -6, -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, and then we get to the hole. So so we have all these negative values until we get to -1/2. -1/2 is a problem. Negative infinity to -1/2, and I heard someone say parentheses. How come it's not a bracket? It's a hole. Is that point actually on the graph? No, holes are actually missing points from the graph. There's a little gap there. It's not actually there. So we put a parenthesis. It's missing. Well, look after that. So now we have the y value of -1/2. We don't quite have it, but a y value of -1/4 we can see on there, and a y value of 0 we can see on there, and then we have this dotted line.
And you have to,
That's an asymptote. We have to skip that.
so you do -1/2 to 1.
Yeah. What was the asymptote at? What value? 1/3.
So it goes from -1/2 to 1/3.
So it goes from -1/2 to 1/3. So this is a y value of -1/2. We don't have that. We do have a y value of -1/4. We do have a y value of 0. And we have these little itty bitty y values over here, but then we hit that asymptote and we do not have that y value. So we're going to say our next little group of y values would be from the whole at -1/2 to the asymptote of 1/3. Yeah.
What career?
So the stuff that we're doing right now, analyzing graphs, this is like foundational background knowledge so that you could eventually work with any type of graph in the future. So there's lots of jobs that work with graphs, and these specific graphs don't necessarily pertain to a job, but you need to know this vocabulary to go further in math.
So how come we didn't put a bracket around?
Yeah, why? Can somebody tell me why did we not use brackets here? I don't. Yeah, one of them's a whole and you can't equal the whole. One of them's an asymptote, you can't equal the asymptote. That's why we get parentheses. Yeah. Like that.
In the problem, is there a pattern that you find like in the picture?
So hey guys, we just had a good question. We can't do these problems as easily as the domain, right? But there are some things to look for, and some of those things to look for is wholes seem to be numbers that are important. Horizontal asymptotes seem to be important. Maxes and mins seem to be important. So when you're doing the range, even if every problem is a little bit different and you do have to look at the picture, there are still things about the graph that you're always going to look at because they might be something that gives you a clue. Yeah. Okay, we are not done yet. We have one more piece of the graph. So we skipped the y value of 1/3, but then over here I can see y values that are a little bit bigger than 1/3.
So it's 1/3 to infinity?
So after this, I'm going to say u, and then I've got the 1/3. And then I've got like the y value of 1. I have a y value of 2, a y value of 3, a y value of 4, of 5, of 6, of 7, of 8. So after this, what do we have? Infinity. So this is telling us that our range is all the numbers that are less than -1/2. It's all the numbers between -1/2 and 1/3, and then all the numbers that are bigger than 1/3. Those are all the numbers we're skipping. So we're skipping -1/2 because of the whole. We're skipping 1/3 because of the asymptote.
That your view. I feel comfortable because I still with max and still trying to get my but I'm going to get there.
Okay. All right. Here's the next one. So what are the things that we should probably label in our picture? The whole. We need to label that. We got -3 3/7. We've got a minimum at 0.54, -0.02. We got a maximum Okay. Are we ready?
No.
Now, this one is even different from the other three we did. Because they are really, so what I'm really trying to say is we can't memorize the process here. We have to understand what we're doing. That's the only way to do these is to actually understand them. So we have an arrow going down. So what do we put to start with? Negative infinity. Yep, they all have started that way. So -8 is good, -7, -6, -5, -4, and then we can't even get to -3. We have to stop. Where do we stop at? -3.48. Now, that is a point on the graph. That's an actual point, so what do I put? A bracket. So we have this bottom section down here, negative infinity, and then we stop at this point right here. Yeah. You always start wherever's down. Yep. So because range is always from down to up, so I just look where I can see down on the graph. Okay? All right. And then after that, it seems like we're done with this one, so we'll hop over here. So I am skipping. Are we listening? I am skipping a y value of -3. I'm skipping a y value of -2. I'm skipping a y value of -1. And what is my first y value that I can see? -0.02. And we put a bracket around it because it was actually a point that was truly on the graph. Okay, so we have a y value of -0.02. We have a y value of 0. And then do you guys see how we have a hole over here?
Yeah.
The hole has a y value of 3/7. And be careful. Yeah, and I want you to look at it. If we look directly across from the hole, look over here. Do you guys see how we have a y value of 3/7 right there?
Yes.
So do we need to skip it? No, I can see it. I got a y value of 3/7. So on this one, the hole, the value, the y coordinate of the hole does not need to be skipped. Because you got it. You got it on the other side of the same curve. So we have that minimum, we have that -0.02, and then we have all the decimals that are between 0 and 1, and then we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. And so what should we put now? Infinity. So on this one, this was different because we didn't have to skip the hole this time. The y value of the hole showed up somewhere else on the graph. So that's the range.